Hello everyone, today we're gonna talk about how we went from this to this. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If this is the first time you visit my channel, my name is Odilo and I work as an art director in the beauty industry. After spending decades researching Korean beauty, I decided to start this channel to share with you informative content on Korean beauty trends and history. So if you'd like to be the first to know about what's trending in K-beauty, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. This video in particular is part of a series where I talk about the history of Korean beauty and give you some insights on the beauty practices of a certain era or decade. In the previous episode of this series, we saw some ancient Korean skincare tips that go back to the Joseon dynasty, which was an important Korean dynasty that ruled the country for over 5 centuries, from 1392 to the Japanese occupation of Korea in 1910. In that video, I talked about how the female beauty ideal of the time was a woman with clear and bright skin that is flawless and radiant like white jade. The ideal of fair skin in Korean beauty is a very complex topic, and I find there's a lot of misinformation about it online, so I'm planning to make a separate video about it. But for now, what you need to know is that during this period, a fair complexion was considered ideal because it was linked to the Confucian ideals of beauty and purity. Being beautiful in a Confucian society like Joseon Korea was not simply about being physically attractive, but it was believed that the body and the soul form one single system, like two faces of the same coin. And as a result, it was thought that a beautiful soul would only inhabit a beautiful body, and vice versa. Having a beautiful soul for a woman in Joseon Korea meant being a filial daughter, a loyal wife to your husband, and spending lots of time with your children so they can grow up to become good people. If you think about it, these are all activities that take place indoors. So in a way, we can say that having a beautiful soul for a woman during the Joseon period meant being able to afford to spend lots of time indoors without having to work outside in the burning sun, if you see what I mean. But that's not all. In my video on traditional Korean medicine, I told you about Ki, which is thought to be the vital force behind every living entity. Well, according to Korean Confucianism, this vital force is passed down from generation to generation, so it was important to preserve the body in its original state of purity, because the body was seen as the reflection of one person's family heritage. So tanning, freckles, dark spots and blemishes were all considered undesirable because they disrupted the original state of the body. For this reason, during the Joseon dynasty, men and women were forbidden to cut their hair, and women were encouraged to wear very minimal makeup. The focus on natural makeup was also influenced by the fact that materialism and excessive decoration conflicted with the Confucian ideal of simplicity. We can still find examples of heavy makeup during this period, but it was mostly associated with courtesans and other morally compromised women. Now, there are still elements of the Joseon beauty ideals in contemporary Korean beauty, but it's obvious that a lot has changed from these standards of purity and minimal makeup. But how did we get to where we are today? Well, we need to step back to 100 years ago. As I mentioned before, in 1910, Korea effectively became a Japanese colony. From a beauty standpoint, these had two main consequences. First, you should note that economically speaking, Korea used to be an isolated country until 1876, when Japan forced Korea to open its ports and enter into a commercial treaty with them. From that moment until the end of the Japanese occupation in 1945, both Western and Japanese beauty products started to flood the Korean market. These products looked extremely fancy compared to the traditional homemade cosmetics produced in the country, and this caused Korean products to be pushed out of the market. One of the few exceptions was Pak Gabun, which was the very first mass-produced Korean cosmetic in the history of Korean beauty. It was a face powder that was based on the model of foreign powders, and it was a huge bestseller, until in 1930 people discovered that lead was not a great ingredient to have in your cosmetics. Along with foreign beauty products, this period was also the first time when Western beauty standards were introduced to Korea. The models used in magazines and advertisements were styled after the look that was popular in Japan at the time, which in turn was inspired by the latest Western beauty trends. This is particularly important because these advertisements presented the traditional Korean beauty standards and even traditionally Korean facial features as something undesirable, and this had major consequences in the following decades. If you look at the average face of Korean women today and the average face of Japanese women, you can tell that Korean women tend to have a broader face and a stronger jawline compared to Japanese women, who instead have a more pointy chin and what we could call a natural V-line. Keep in mind that these visuals were generated by a computer using modern-day pictures, but Korean documents from the Japanese colonial era show us that the differences were even more evident at the time. When they first learn about contemporary Korean beauty standards, many people are curious about why a V-line is considered ideal in Korea. But not many people seem to know that this ideal originates from what is commonly referred to as Japanese cultural imperialism. Think about it. If you're constantly being told that your natural features are undesirable and that you can improve them using certain products, then you start to invest your time, money and energy to better your looks and be an accepted member of society instead of focusing on things like, I don't know, liberating your country. And these two elements, the proliferation of Western beauty products and the introduction of these new beauty standards, gave birth to a phenomenon called modern girl. Modern girls were a new generation of young Korean women who grew up under colonial rule and looked at everything that came from outside of Korea as something incredibly modern and revolutionary. Modern girls went against all the traditional Korean values that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. For starters, they sported short hair, which was a very scandalous act at the time, because as I mentioned before, in Confucianism the body was seen as a family heritage, and altering your body in any way, including getting a haircut, was considered an expression of wanting to cut ties with your own family. Secondly, they ditched traditional clothes for Western-style fashion and replaced the natural makeup of the Joseon period with a stronger look, characterized by trimmed eyebrows in a crescent shape, face contouring, and dark lips. Modern girls also embrace all sorts of elements of Western popular culture, like going to the movies, spending time in cafes, and listening to jazz music. In a way, their entire existence was a rejection of traditional Korean Confucian values. This all sounds incredible, empowering, and liberating, but when we look at it with a critical eye, we can see that this phenomenon was not truly about changing the role of women in society, but it was more about acquiring a false sense of freedom through the consumption of foreign products and addition to foreign beauty standards, while completely ignoring the fact that this sense of freedom came at the expense of real issues, like the actual freedom of their home country. And this is the reason why this phenomenon was heavily criticized by intellectuals of the time. And it also happens to be the same reason why Korean feminists nowadays are so critical of the Korean beauty industry. And I find it fascinating how these three factors, Confucian values, Western consumerism, and feminist ideas, are the main elements that are shaping Korean beauty standards nowadays. And I hope you find it interesting too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.